Okay, Penny, take it away.
I gather I've been asked to give a sort of beginner's guide, an introduction to historical house styles, because there's a lot of newcomers in town. And so I feel a bit humble because there are certainly people like Morley Thompson who know much more than I do. It's not my field, I'm not an expert, but I have been in heritage for long enough that I've been around lots of experts, so I have a sort of general knowledge. So I'm going to try and give you a skimming across the surface of at least 2 styles, and if I have time, 3. Philip, you're going to make raspberry noises at half an hour.
Okay.
Okay. So obviously the first Swellendam house style to consider is so-called Cape Dutch, of which we have several fine examples, although very few actually of the sort of grand Boerland houses that people generally associate with Cape Dutch. I'm sure you've all got an idea in your head about what the style is. It's the white walls, it's the thatched roof, it's local materials, lime washed, and single story, 1 room wide, letter of the alphabet plans like you can see at the back of the glen there, and some gables, although not necessarily. It was only people who got quite rich who erected gables. So often they would put a gable onto a house that didn't have one when their ship came in. I'm going to focus on the woodwork in terms of the house styles, because it's something that you can see from the outside. It's very characteristic, and it should give you a toolbox so that as you go around your business in Swellendam, you'll be able to recognize some of the language of the buildings that you're looking at. So we'll start by just quickly looking at the plan form. Do I have to point it at the computer?
No, yeah, I guess.
Nope.
Okay.
The projector.
Projector.
No.
No. Computer. No.
Okay, Ben, just use the up and down arrow. Sorry about that. It worked just now, but yeah.
Okay, there we have a typical Cape plan. As you can see, you come straight into a voorkamer, and then you have rooms on either side. And depending on how big the house is, you might have an achterkamer behind a screen, and then you might have more wings with the kitchen and other utilities at the back. An open stoep with stoep seats if you're a grand house. But what we are kind of concentrating on is the windows. And because of that situation of coming straight into the voorkamer, what you have is a central front door and half windows on each side. So the doors are generally bo and onder stable doors, usually with a fan light for extra light. Some of them get very fancy, and you can open the top of the door and pull down a glass fan light so that you get more light in. I think Boschendal has one of those. But we don't have anything quite so grand in Swellendam. Then the rooms beyond that would have full-sized windows. The characteristics of Cape windows are that they are flush with the outer face of the house, and the frames of the windows are quite prominent and fat. They have small panes of glass, which is all that you could get at that time, and they have quite thick mullions keeping the panes of glass together. There are generally 2 kinds, as you see here, the casement windows, which like these in this room, open inwards because the shutters on the outside, solid shutters, open outwards, so they obviously can't open the same way. And then the second type of window is the sashes, of which only the bottom sash goes up and down. The top one is fixed. And only the bottom one would have shutters, because you might want to open the window but close the shutters and you're still secure in your house. So, let's see, arrows. There is a typical Cape building which you're all familiar with, which exactly reflects that sort of pattern. You can see even on this very top window, the window is open, so it's kind of disappeared into those wonderful deep window sills that we get in Cape houses. There are others in Swellendam. Rotterdam now has been given back the casements that it would have had in its period. It had previously been modernized, Victorianized. And De Kloof has the same kind of windows as well. But then the next kind of Cape house, the sash windows, this of course is Klipperrivier, Hans Fransen's photo. And you can see those tall sashes with their thick frames, big fat frames sitting right on the face of the building. And then our Drosty has a very unusual thing. I don't know if it exists anywhere else. Do you, perhaps, Johan? They have the fixed upper sash as though it's a sash window, but then at the bottom they have casements. It's really, really unusual. The other thing that one can mention here is that Swellendam is fairly unusual compared to the Boerland or the Oeverberg, perhaps. I'm not an expert, but we have a lot more of these hipped dormer roofs, the thatched ones. And I'm not sure why that is, but the little upswept gables and the little windows underneath then allow you to get some light into your loft without actually the gable, which would normally supply that. So we're going quite quickly here. It's good. On to so-called Georgian, which I prefer to call Cape Georgian because it's very particular, especially in Swellendam. A general sort of overview, it is obviously related to the British occupation at the Cape and the influence that the English styles had on Cape architecture. And if you think about the time of Jane Austen, that's the kind of, if you think of the Regency Bath, that beautiful crescent, that is real pucker Georgian architecture. Very restrained, very refined, geometric, delicate. And that kind of classic Georgian building would probably be double-story. Often it's double-story. It's usually symmetrical. It either has a flat roof with a parapet like this one here, or sometimes they would have a low-pitched roof but with boxed eaves, so that it has a very kind of restrained outline. But in the Oeverberg, people knew very well how to build houses. They were not particularly impressed. I mean, they'd fought against the British. They'd sent a regiment down to the Cape in 1795. They didn't like the British all that much. So the Georgian stuff didn't take off here for quite a long time. It was a very slow arrival. And what they tended to do was carry on building the way they always did, but they would put in Georgian windows and doors. which they were able to order once the Barry Empire got going from the Barrys. It would be like going down to the Co-op and you could buy the latest fashionable windows from the Barrys. So the first major influence that the English had on the Cape style was this idea of coming straight into the voorkamer was not considered ordentlik anymore. They wanted some kind of something in between where the people lived and the entrance. So they introduced a passage. And that, of course, had an influence on the whole facade. And you can see that with a passage you don't have rooms for half windows on the side. So if you build a passage you don't have them. You rather have full-sized windows throughout your whole facade. The woodwork is usually symmetrical in Georgian houses, but if you go up to Grahamstown where there's far more real Georgian because of the English settlers, you will find that that doesn't necessarily apply. They introduced a double door instead of the boer and unner with 8 panels. The bottom panel is usually got a kind of flatter molding than the upper panels. And beautiful geometric fan lights, wonderfully delicate, gorgeous fan lights. And they introduced double sliding sashes. Both of them now slide. The panes of glass are bigger. It's imported blown glass or crown glass, they called it. And because the panes are bigger and they wanted the delicacy of a very fine mullion, those mullions had to get really deep. So if you look at some of the gorgeous Georgian windows in town, you'll see that their mullions are sometimes that deep, but very fine, so that you get a very fine line between the panes. Inside, okay, never mind. They don't have those horns that you see on the windows below, the Georgian ones. So that is a very easy way of telling a Georgian window, even if they're not so magnificently big. Generally inside they would have a splayed reveal, sort of like these, but maybe a bit more exaggerated, and those lovely panelled folding shutters, usually top and bottom, so that you could close and open them as you wished. So yeah, that is the introduction of Georgian woodwork to Swellendam, and as you see on the old house, it can be a very beautiful, very charming result with the little swept up gable, the lovely fan light, the big windows, the delicate... the thing I forgot to tell you is that because of fire regulations, after the Great Fire of London, the British had introduced a regulation that windows and doors had to be recessed into the facade because fire spread very rapidly on surface timber. So the Georgian windows suddenly also are now into the facade, so you get a more modulated light and shade than the sort of flat facade of the Cape. Yeah, the old house, there are a lot of these, this I would say is a very characteristic Swellendam Georgian example.
But it has small panes.
Well, they're bigger than Cape panes.
Okay.
Cape panes are that size. Georgian panes start getting bigger. I'm not sure of the technology around the glass. Maybe Johan, do you know? No? Anyway, there's probably a reason. As I said, I'm not an expert. And yeah, this Mayville has also something that is unusual in that it has French doors with external louvered shutters. which in those days they called Venetian blinds, which is where we get the term for our horrible modern things. But things, if you don't do it right, can also go quite badly wrong when you try to build a Cape house with a passage and Georgian fenestration. And this, I mean, it's a lovely house, but if you look at the way where's this thing? Let's see if this works. If you look at the gable in a Cape house would have come down and there would have been a window inside there. Here the gable comes down and it hits the top of the window. It's proportionally, it's not good. Structurally, it's not good. It's awkward. Despite the elegance of the woodwork, it's not an elegant result. So, and Rothman House, our favorite, the JVDS house, if you go and have another look at that and you stop just admiring that gorgeous gable and you look at how that gable comes down onto the windows, it's actually really shocking.
Which house is that?
The one down at the bottom next to Woodpecker, JVDS house. With that,
Rothman's Manor.
yeah. It's just lovely, but it freaks me out whenever I see it. And then this one is interesting because this is almost a classic Georgian little cottage. But you can see that actually it probably was a little Cape single-story house because it does have the half windows on each side, which are now, they put Georgian windows into those openings. But the pattern is definitely Cape. And then they've repeated it up above just as the Georgians would have. So another very charming sort of variation of Cape Georgian. Lovely, lovely mix-ups. How much time have I spent? Can I race through Victorianism?
Yes, so you've only done 17 minutes. So far.
Okay, yay. And you can get your wine and soup quickly. Okay, Victorian. There's a lot to say about Victorian, but I'm really going to just skip over the surface of it. The general sort of thing about Victorianism is it's a style of the Industrial Revolution. It's suddenly mass production of building elements in factories. You can go and buy your corrugated iron from about 1860, which was a fantastic innovation, and a lot of people would put iron on top of their thatched roofs because it was just so useful. But corrugated iron also enables you to do all sorts of complicated, weird roofs, which the Victorians were into. It was also the time of empire, the British Empire, and the introduction of the sort of fusion of architectural elements around the world. So we get the introduction of the veranda, which is a sort of Indian, I think it's even an Indian word, but perfectly suited to the Cape climate, and well, in fact, to the South African climate. So, and also the term bungalow, I think, is also an Indian word. So that kind of influence is becoming more kind of global. It was also a time of revivalism. There were revival styles. Gothic revival, Tudor revival, Italianate revival, you name it. They were reviving it. And but what you find in Swellendam is almost exclusively it's Cape Dutch revival. Because as I said, the Swellendammers know what their buildings are for and how they should look. So in terms of the plan, there are now, this is from a wonderful little booklet by Donnie Tehran from the University of Port Elizabeth. And the plan that is most often found, you can see it developing from the sort of Georgian with the central passage and a double room, thick, to having a veranda at the back, to having a veranda at the front and at the back. And then the one that we often see in Swellendam is this one, with a small veranda, projecting gable, passage down the middle and rooms on both sides. But to get back to the focus of this talk, just because of the variation in plans, suddenly for the first time, asymmetrical buildings are now becoming more and more common. Whereas before, in the previous historical periods, asymmetry was not very common. So now we're on the bottom row there, the Victorian period. There's a lot more variation than this drawing shows you, but Buckenberg, that grouping in Hermanus Stain Street, Buckenberg number 12 and the next one, all have doors almost exactly like that, double doors with arched panes. They would have a fan light also to light the passage when the door is shut. But you also get single four panel doors that you're all familiar with them. We are quite kind of familiar with Victorianism, I think. And now we can make plate glass, so we can have really, really big panes. As you see there, 2 panes per sash is very common, otherwise 6 is also quite common. And in Swindon, you often get Victorian houses which still have those internal folding panel shutters, but the sort of epitome of Victorianism is the what do you call those things? Louvered shutters on the outside. And then, of course, you could get a catalogue. You could go to the Barrys and get a catalogue of woodwork, and there would be a tremendous variation. So that's the happy doors and all that stuff you could buy, ironmongery. But in Swellendam, the decoration tends to be more restrained than it is in the cities like the Cape, because transporting stuff like that, I presume, was quite expensive. So in Swellendam, you tend to see more timber decoration like that, rather than the cast iron brookie-lace. But this house in Van Eden Street is a really fine example of Victorianism. It's got all the elements. And if you go around the other side, it's even got a little castle room sticking out with battlements. Very, very Victorian. And more examples. There's a symmetrical one with grouped windows. This one has actually had its woodwork put back, its wooden decoration put back since this photo was taken. It's also a very fine house with its sandstone plinth. And then I'm going to finish it off just to talk briefly about the idea of a style of buildings having a style. It actually doesn't work like that. It's much more evolutionary. So, and in Swellendam in particular, you get layerings of different periods and different styles, which I think can be quite useful for you to be able to go out there and say, okay, oh look, that's a Victorian window. It's got those little horns at the bottom. But before the 1960s to 1980s, we probably didn't have any pure Cape Dutch buildings like you've seen the pictures of, because they were Victorianized. And in the 1960s to 80s, the beginnings of the conservation movement, the idea was to restore a house to its proper style, what it should be. And almost universally we have lost the Victorianization of Cape Dutch houses, which is a great pity. If you go and look at Arthur Elliott's photographs, I think they are really exciting, those Cape Dutch houses with their verandas, but then that's me. And this is another interesting example of how styles crash into one another and give you a lovely result, because this is actually probably the finest Georgian house in Swellendam, but it's also got the finest Victorian cast iron veranda. And heaven forbid that anybody should propose taking off that veranda in order to return it to a pure style. So that's what I have to say. I hope that you have fun wandering around and reading the houses. Thank you.
Penny, thank you so much. That was lovely. Most enjoyable. Are there any questions? Anybody want to ask questions? Yes, at the back there. I'm sorry, I can't see who you are.
Why do you stop at the end of the 19th century?
Because I thought I wouldn't have time.
Okay. The one thing that everybody does is they stop at the end of the 19th century and they talk about Sunday.
No, I'm sorry, Edwin. Is it Edwin?
Yeah.
Sounds like it. I actually had a whole lot of slides on Edwardianism and those wonderful, strange houses with the cement stoops in front. But I really didn't want to keep you from your wine and your soup and stuff.
Very considerate.
So if you really want to know more, we can do another one later.
Yeah, that'd be great. Like that, yes. There's another question at the back there. Can't see who it is. Bev.
Bev, yeah. You know the Moody's house at Groot Father's Horse?
Yes.
Michelle and Keith Moody's
Yes,
house?
I don't know it well. I've been there once.
Okay. So my understanding is that's sort of the oldest house in the whole area, but it's not Cape Dutch. What would that style be?
No, but the Moody's only arrived.
Late 1700s, I think. He was just before the 1820 settlers. 1817, I think, somewhere around about there.
Yeah, no, so.
And it was there before the Moody's was built. It belonged to a state.
Okay.
It was there before the Moody's.
So have you any idea what style house that is then, Morley?
I think it's a modified Cape Dutch style. But it seems to have elements of the Orkneys in it too, the Legs house. But originally I'm sure it's a Cape Dutch style. It's different. For instance, it's got in Second Game, it's got a bit of a Joss Day style.
Yeah, it's got hipped gables, and it's got some Georgian woodwork, I know, but it also has some Cape windows from my
There's
memory.
some Cape Dutch windows.
Yeah.
Bev, I don't know if you heard that answer.
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you can speak to Morley while having some wine. Anybody else? Great. Well,
Yay.
yes, that was lovely. Thank you very much. We're going to ask Margie to come and thank you officially.
Can I take this thing off?
Thank you so much. Can you hear? Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. It really has been fabulous.
The mic, Margie.
Never mind, she's talking to me.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear now?
Yes.
It's been an absolutely wonderful talk, and I can just see the Heritage Association members tomorrow going around Swellendam and peering in people's windows, If you have an old house, please don't be afraid if you find somebody doing that. But really, it was so enlightening. And, you know, just to see this picture of Schooner Ort and see the two different styles, I'd never even realized that before. So it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Penny, and thanks for taking the time to do this. And
Well, yeah. Anyway, thanks very much everybody for attending. That was much appreciated. I'm sorry the lighting is so bad. We've got two, what you call spraylichten, what do you call those things? Spotlights, but both of them don't work from the museum. So I'm sorry about that. This is the best we have. We'll move this a bit to the back so that you guys can go and have your vino and Ismay, thank you so much for doing the soup. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, the meeting is now closed. Very nice.